Today's lesson is about the Pythagorean theorem and it's some of its related vocabulary. First term that you need to make certain you understand is hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the side of the right triangle that is opposite the right angle. The hypotenuse is always the longest side of any right triangle. The other two sides of the right triangle are called legs. Pythagorean triples simply means three numbers that in combination, if you substitute A and B, you can find C for the Pythagorean theorem, or if you know A and C, you can find B, working backwards. Those are Pythagorean triples. Three numbers that you can substitute in that will work correctly and balance for the Pythagorean theorem. We're going to work with those later in the lesson. The next theorem you need to know is the Pythagorean inequality theorem. This states that the sum of the squares of the legs of a right triangle, that's a squared plus b squared, if a squared plus b squared is less than c squared, then you will have an obtuse triangle. Conversely, if you have the sum of the squares of the legs of a right triangle, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, and that number is greater than c squared, then that will result in an acute triangle. This is helpful when you're solving problems. The final theorem is called the Hinge theorem. It's called the Hinge theorem because it works like a hinge, and you'll see the example in a moment. The definition of the Hinge theorem is, if two sides of a triangle are congruent to two sides of another triangle, and the included angle of the first triangle is larger than the second, then the third side of the first triangle is longer than the third side of the second triangle. You need to copy this down, and I'm going to show you what this means on the next screen. If two sides of a triangle are congruent to two sides of another triangle, and the included angle of the first is larger than the second, then the third side of the first triangle is longer than the third side of the second triangle. This is what it means. If two sides of two triangles are congruent, well, the two sides of two triangles are congruent. I've got two triangles here. One side is 6, another side is 4. This is like a hinge now, where this one can close up, and it's still got 4 and 6, like this is 4 and 6. But the angles are different. So that's why it's called the Hinge theorem. Now what it says is that if two sides of two triangles are congruent, and the measure of the first one is larger than the second, then the length of this third side will be longer than the length of this side. That's the Hinge theorem. Please go to Edmodo, find lesson 3.3, and complete the check for understanding.